Good evening and good night. That was a crappy intro, but here I am again to talk about some more good stuff. Just a while back, I was doing some exploring and trying to understand exactly how grid works. So, one of the things I did was put together this little example to examine reflow. So, for example, in the first example here, I've defined three columns. So, grid template columns, 200 pixels, 200 pixels, 200 pixels, and voila, that's what I have. If I went in here and I went, you know what, I want 500 pixels, boom, that middle one is 500 pixels. Want 100, great, let's go with 200, boom. Now, with the second example, I have it using the autofit, and I'm saying please autofit a number of 200 pixel columns. So in this case, I've got room for all three items to fit, and sure enough, want 200, 200, 200. Boom, I'm done. Now, in the final example, I'm using repeat, but I'm going to create a number of different columns. So I have a 200, a 100, and a 200, but I have more items, so it is going to repeat that pattern of 200, 100, 200. There are some interesting side effects that we'll take a look at here as I play with this. Let's look at resizing. So as I resize down, there's a couple things that we're going to notice that'll happen. So for example, here in this last one, I had room over here for that column. So why did it drop down to the next line? And if you look at what it's repeating, it's essentially repeating this as a group. So, we have 200, 100, 200, and it repeats that again as 200, 100, 200. So therefore, can it fit, essentially three columns or the 500 pixels that it needed? And since it couldn't, it took that whole 500 pixels, moved them down to the next line. So that's just something to kind of be aware of. I don't know how much people would be playing with the sort of multi-grid, different dimensions with AutoFit. I don't know if I'm going to find it too useful to use, but maybe you will. With the other one here, obviously we still have room, so everything works great. And as I continue to resize down, we get to a point where, sure enough, with AutoFit, it can no longer fit all three columns on the same line, so it moves one column down to the next line. Again, everything is working great. But you'll notice with the first one here, I've defined the three 200 pixel columns, 200, 200, 200. It didn't move anything down to the next line. And that's because if you consider what grid template columns does, it essentially it creates those spaces and allows me to align items on each of those in each of those columns. It doesn't have any sort of reflow possibility. So in this situation where I'm defining grid columns in this way, if I'm trying to build a responsive website, I'm not going to have this auto reflow. I'm actually going to have to use media queries to create a different layout on a smaller viewport. So in this viewport, I would say, hey, look at this. It won't fit. Maybe when I move it down to the next line, what does that look like? Is it two and one fully across? Is it, maybe in this case, I do want to go completely stacked, one over the other. But I do have to use media queries in order to do that. Grid won't let me. That's basically all I wanted to kind of point out with this little demo. Just kind of recognizing when we resize things down. If I'm toggling the page width here like this, how things will reflow. So you'll notice here, for example, I toggled the page width, and yes, this is going to overflow that container because of my grid template column definitions. And for example, like if I go back here and I add a fourth column, and it moves on to the next line because I don't have enough room. If I create another 200 pixels, boom, it's on that same line. If I toggle the page width, boom, it completely overflows that container because of that. So something to be aware of. And of course, as you notice with the last item, because of the way the repeat works, it's treating all of those as sort of this one contiguous block. So even in that situation where it couldn't fit that third column inside the box, it is still going to keep it on the same line and even overflow the container as it does here. So hopefully that gives you a better understanding of Grid and how it works, and certainly helped with me. So enjoy.